good morning, or good afternoon, whichever it ends up being. My name is Julia Phelan, and I'm here today to talk to you about how learning is hard, but understanding how it works can help you teach and learn more efficiently. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about learning science and learning engineering and how we develop expertise. And the goal of any training, any teaching experience is to build expertise, but the fact that learning to do something well requires effort and time is often unappreciated and not understood as well as we would like it to be. Because at the end of the day, learning is hard. It's worthwhile, but it's hard. But when we have a better understanding of how learning actually happens, we can better design effective activities to promote engagement and meaningful learning. So if you take a look at these questions, does anything strike you about them? Can you answer any of them with certainty? Or perhaps you'd need to know something else about the person doing the action or the person whom you're trying to teach. So if you look at, is changing a tire difficult? You might think, well, I don't know, maybe not. It depends on what my prior knowledge is about changing a tire. Have I done it before? Is this my first time? How difficult is it to learn how to juggle 4 balls? Well, maybe it's easy if you already know how to juggle 3, but maybe it's not so easy if you don't know how to juggle any, right? So anytime we're thinking about, what's the best way to do something, or is something easy or difficult, it's not as straightforward a question to answer. Think about this, what kind of car should this person buy? Or do you think this person will be a good student? Maybe, maybe not, right? We need to know a lot more information about these people to really be able to answer those questions. Maybe this lady has a large family. Maybe she drives a long way to work every day and so needs a certain kind of car. But just by looking at them, we can't tell anything. And lots of times people ask me, what's the best way to teach a particular skill or concept? And it might be nice, but probably not very interesting if there was a single optimal instructional approach for teaching someone how to juggle or change a tire, separate an egg, solve fractions problems, or if there was one formula for maximally motivating students to read more effectively. But unfortunately, there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution for teaching and learning. It just depends, right? Learners aren't all starting from the same place. The context in which they're learning is not the same. Our learners have different prior knowledge, different experience, different values, different levels of self-efficacy, different emotions, different sense of belonging, interests, home dynamics, learning needs, you name it. And so the same strategy or technique is not going to work for all learners in all contexts at all times, nor is the same strategy or technique appropriate for the same learner at all points along the educational journey, right? So as we learn, our needs change. But what doesn't change is that we as educators must always keep in mind how learning happens, not just how we wished it happened, but how it actually happens, so we can more effectively create and adapt environments that support learning for everyone. And one thing that I think is really important not to forget is the value that you, the educator or the trainer, bring to the learning environment. It might seem obvious, but sometimes it gets forgotten, particularly when we're trying to create, online or hybrid or different types of learning experiences. That courses of any kind, they're not just content delivery mechanisms, fire hoses of information. You as the educator, as the expert, are bringing huge wealth of experience and knowledge and insight into that environment. And that's really the value added, right? You bring huge value to the equation, and we don't want to forget that. As we think about our teaching strategies and how we design our training and learning experiences, there are 3 things I want to keep in mind, and they all relate to it depends. There's not one go-to solution for every teaching situation, and understanding this can prevent us from putting too much weight onto one strategy, right? Because if we think, okay, we always have to do this in this situation, then we're going to put all of our eggs into that basket, and maybe it's not going to work out. We also have to remember that content and pedagogy are going to interact in different ways. So some things may be more or less relevant for you and your cause or your particular modality than somebody else. So again, we have to think about that it's not always going to be the same thing for everyone. We also have to remember that any tool or strategy that we talk about is only as good as its implementation, right? So any tool or strategy is not going to be helpful or harmful by default. It's just going to depend on what you do with it, which is why we focus not on just what to do, but how to do it. So let's try something. Now, I know you're watching a recording, but I want you to watch the video on the next screen, and then we'll try something. If you're going to try it, it'll be the honor system, right? But I'm going to try it too at the same time. Okay, so I'm just going to watch this video. It's going to play through a few times. While it's playing, I'm going to get my pen and paper. Got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, I think 11 lines, big lines. Okay, see it one more time. 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. All right, now, here's the final product. Okay, and now I want you to try. So pause your video that you're watching right now and try and draw this hand. And I'm going to do the same thing. 11 lines. Okay, I got 1. I got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So here's my picture, if you can see it. All right. Mine's not particularly good, and I ought to be better because I've tried this, I don't know, many, many times at this point. I use this exercise a lot. But okay, let's look at some other people's hands that they've drawn previously. So I don't know if yours looks like any of these. Mine, yeah, I mean, some of those are not bad. Mine was terrible. But this is a very simple example, but one I think which really nicely illustrates this point that, learning anything is hard work, right? And requires real effort. And we might think we can do something, but most things are not as easy as they look, right? We can be deceived. And to master any skill, we need to engage in focused practice. We need to know what to pay attention to and do so. And we need to be able to take in and act on critical feedback. All really important things. So we hear a lot about people watching, these instructional videos like art videos or cooking videos, right? Does doing that make you better at something? Okay, well, let's look at this one. I watch these videos all the time. And they're pretty fascinating and mesmerizing. Just watch a couple of these. All looks quite easy. This one's one of my favorites. So when we look at videos like this, and I watch these all the time, and it looks so easy, right? And so lots of times I've thought, okay, I'm going to get some stuff. I'm going to get all the icing fixings. I'm going to make some cookies. I'm going to decorate them just like this. And very quickly, it all kind of goes to hell in a handbasket, right? Seeing someone perform some difficult task well can kind of convince me or trick me that, maybe I've learned everything I need to know to be able to do that. And only when I actually try and do it, do I really realize yeah, no, I'm not so great. And there was a study I heard out on the radio recently where researchers had a group of people watch a video of someone throwing a bullseye with some darts. And some watched the video one time and some watched it 20 times. And those who watched more felt more confident that they could actually get a bullseye when they tried in real life. But what do you think? They were wrong, right? Both groups were equally bad without having any actual practice, right? Actual physical practice, feedback, all of that stuff, engaging in the activity themselves rather than just watching it. Neither group could do it. And, doing something is a lot different from watching it. It turns out we actually need to do things, right, to develop expertise in anything, but it can be really easy to trick ourselves into thinking that things are easy when we see experts doing them. And so, we have to always be aware of this when we're in our teaching and learning experiences. And we don't have time today to really delve into this idea of the expert blind spot, but it's just something for us to keep in mind that as we develop expertise in whatever subject area that we have it in, we start to make it look easy to have, and we can sometimes forget what it's like to be a novice and forget all of the steps that it took to get us where we are. And so we just have to always keep that in mind. It's a lot easier to watch someone do something than it is to actually do it yourself. So when we think about designing or redesigning learning environments, we've got two big questions. One, how does learning happen? Right, so we have many models in areas such as motivation, goal setting, memory, multimedia learning, perception, attention, that help explain how learning happens and which can inform the design of our impactful learning experiences. And that's the learning science. And the other question is, okay, how can we apply principles of learning science to create and adapt environments that support learning in different contexts? That's the learning engineering part. So why am I showing you this bridge? Well, a scientist, like a physicist, for example, knows a bunch of physical principles and can design a bridge like this. And then when an engineer is going to employ those principles, right, and go out and build the bridge, they have to deal with all sorts of other different practical considerations. It's a whole different game. So the engineer building this bridge in real life must understand the physical principles and also know how to apply them in a particular context. So they need to think about wind resistance. They need to think about, are we near the ocean in this case? Yes. What's the temperature like, right? What's the coefficient of friction on the surface of this bridge? All of these things make it not exactly sort of ideal lab conditions. And so we design and implement learning experiences. Similarly, we're not necessarily operating under these ideal, standardized, repeatable conditions, right? And we have to know how to apply what we know about learning in all sorts of different contexts. And that's really what learning engineering and designing good learning experiences is all about. Something else we need to have a quick understanding of is how our minds work and how we take in information from the outside world and how we process it. So we've got two main senses, parallel senses, vision and hearing, and they tell us, basically what's happening in the world around us. And these two senses connect to our working memory, which is the part of our mind that handles like new information coming in, handles sort of, complex problems that we're trying to solve. We get lost in a new city, like we've got to figure it out. All of that's happening in our working memory. And unfortunately, it can get overloaded, right? There's only a certain amount of room in our working memory. It's a little bit slower than we'd like it to be. And it's not perfect, but it's a flexible component. But luckily, working memory has a close connection and collaboration with long-term memory. And that's the part of your mind that has very different characteristics and features from your working memory. Things last a long time there. Many things can happen at once, at the same time, very quickly. And the kinds of processing and decision-making that your long-term memory makes are quite accurate, if they've been trained to be accurate, of course. But it's also kind of rigid. And the working memory and long-term memory kind of work in tandem and have this fast connection. So as we practice and learn new stuff, we shift our activity from our working memory into our long-term memory. And that's the part that sort of deals with this unconscious automatic processing. So when we're first learning to read, for example, we're having to spend a lot of time and attention focusing on specific words that we're learning, and sounding them out and, that sort of thing. And then as you start to gain some automaticity in reading, now all of that stuff is taken care of in your long-term memory. And now you can start engaging your working memory in things like comprehending what you're reading or reading a whole sentence all at once, right? So that way, your long-term memory can take care of some of the stuff, and your working memory doesn't have to work as hard. And all of that is what learning is all about. And that's why we need a lot of practice, right, to become fluent at something. And the only way for us to build up our long-term memory is to really deeply engage our working memory in things that are meaningful. I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of those types of activities when we have our in-person sort of question and answer session during the conference. So I want to show you a diagram, and I don't want you to be scared because it has a lot of information on it. And I'm not trying to violate all the rules of good presentations here by showing you all these words on the page, but just to give you a sense of all of the things that contribute to learning, and if not present, can get in the way. Or in some cases, when they are present, they're going to impede learning, like cognitive load, extraneous cognitive load, for example. The key thing to take note of is that we need to do things to foster storage of new information. And when we have our live session during the conference, we're going to try a few activities that will help illustrate some of this. Okay, so there are lots of things that we could talk about, but given our limited time, I've introduced some concepts about how people learn. And next, we're going to talk a little bit about what motivates people to engage and persist in learning, and how we can use that knowledge to create and choose teaching strategies and learning strategies that will allow us to be more effective and efficient and foster meaningful learning. And we're really focusing in on this element of our diagram. Students have paid attention to something, they've moved information into their working memory, then they need to process it sufficiently, which we need to think about the amount of time that they're spending on something, but also how deeply and meaningfully they're processing information. And then that's going to allow it to be encoded into their long-term memory, where they can then retrieve it later. Now, we know a lot about how learning expertise work, but sometimes things can get in the way. And when we design our learning experiences, we pay attention to that learning science piece. But we also have to think about what could be an impediment, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how good your learning environment is. If students are not motivated to start and persist and put in effort, then you're going to end up with something like this, or even this, right? which we don't want. Which brings me back to, how do we do that? Well, guess what? Depends. Motivation is a key piece of this puzzle. We know learning is hard, and we need to be very mindful of the impediments, right, to learners starting, persisting, and putting in effort. So students need to value what they're doing. They need to feel that they can do it. They must have confidence and a level of self-efficacy that they can succeed. And they have to feel that the way forward is free of insurmountable obstacles, that things aren't standing in their way, that there won't be things that they'll easily be able to point to as an excuse for not doing something. And they also have to feel a sense of belonging and acceptance by those around them. They have to be in a positive, constructive mental state. We're not going to have really much time today to talk about extraneous cognitive load, but if you've ever thought about that idea, if any of these things, particularly emotional state, if you're distracted by something, then you're not going to be able to learn as well, because remember, we only have a limited amount of room in our working memory. So it's not enough for us to design learning environments that would work if only people would actually kind of get down to the business of learning and getting into them. But as learning engineers, we need to think very intentionally and purposefully about what will motivate our learners to get started and persist with the hard work that's required to learn. And a part of this is diagnosing and treating motivation issues. That's part of that learning activity design and implementation. We need to figure out what we can do to help students engage. So let's look at some things that can impact motivation, one at a time. So first of all, there's value. What if a student's like, I don't really care enough about this, right? I don't want to do this. I don't care. This is not something for me. So what are some things that we can do to help students find value in what they're doing? Well, one of the things we can do is find out what they care about, right? And connect that to a particular task or a particular problem that you're trying to get them to engage with. Another thing you can do is kind of mix things up, right? Provide varied and interesting tasks that are active, that are authentic, hopefully enjoyable. And, when you can even give people choices as long as they're aligned to your particular learning outcomes and learning goals. Then some level of choice can be really motivating to students. You can also help learners apply their existing expertise and prior knowledge and, do a little probing, like figure out how can you sort of take the perspective of the learner, right? Probe a little bit more to learn about their interests and what makes them tick. And if there's any of those pieces that you can incorporate into your learning environment, great. And you can also make clear that whatever the future benefit is of that completing some problem will yield, or what is it going to prevent happening in the future, and making that really evident to students can be really helpful. Because when someone doesn't value a task at the outset and the values mismatch isn't really apparent, your best bet may be to try and appeal to multiple different components of this value puzzle. And one or more of them may resonate with a particular learner more than another one. So another thing that can stand in the way of student learning is self-efficacy, right? Students who think, I don't think I can do this. And this expectancy or self-efficacy really relates to the abilities people have and also their belief in their own capability. And if someone doesn't think they can do something, they'll be much, much less motivated to engage in it in the first place. They may value it, right? They may think, okay, yes, I absolutely see the value in this, but you know what? I don't think I can do it. I don't have the confidence that I can actually do this thing. And so some of the things we can do are to show people concrete examples of how, with effort, right, we don't want to undersell that it's going to take effort to learn things, but with effort, ability can improve, and people can develop expertise. So we can share examples from others like them who've mastered something similar before. Or we can point out times when they've done similar things in the past, right? Or they've mastered similar challenges, which may not be evident to them. And you might be able to remind them like, hey, remember you did this other thing? Well, that was very similar to this. And guess what? You succeeded. You can provide tasks that are at just the right level of difficulty and things which get progressively more difficult, right? And you can allow students and learners to see small wins and see gains as they kind of develop expertise. And another thing that can help with that is breaking things down into manageable chunks. The key thing here is that we're helping people to develop skills and mindsets that support this belief in themselves, building a sense of confidence, competence that maybe they can't do this, but maybe just not yet. So another thing we mentioned was this emotional state, right? So emotions play a hugely important role in learning, and they work hand in hand with cognition to impede or enable learning, right? Negative emotions can hijack our brains in all sorts of ways. And if we have emotional distractions, they tend to be something that can really get in the way of us learning something. And unfortunately, those types of distractions don't always get as much play, right, within learning environments than things like noise or other actual sort of physical distractions. But if a learner is distracted by negative emotions, anxiety, anger, depression, they're not going to be motivated to carry out much of a learning task because their brain is being taken up by all these other non-constructive emotions. And we learn best when we feel connected to and accepted by people in the environment around us. And we want to know, are we safe in this environment? Do I fit in? Is there anyone else here like me? Will I be supported if I need some sort of help or some sort of accommodation? Can I succeed, right? This connects back to that self-efficacy. And do I even know what success looks like? And when we think about the teaching and learning environment, there are so many ways that we can affect change in these areas. Thinking about what does success look like? Making sure that we have very clear learning goals and learning outcomes is one way that we can help students to see, I see where I am, I see what the goal is, and then we can help them get there, right? So these strong negative emotions are going to impede learning. We can stress to students that They're going to improve over time. They're not yet experts, and mistakes are okay. If we can normalize mistakes, normalize errors, show that everybody struggles, it's going to be helpful to get students sort of over some of those emotional barriers they may be feeling. Another thing we can do is, again, helping students develop that sense of belonging in the learning environment. If they feel a sense of psychological safety, they're much more likely to be able to then, be less distracted by things that are bothering them and feel more engaged in whatever they're learning about. Another thing we can do is help students avoid stereotype threat by focusing on their individual effort. Right? And stereotype threat is really when students feel at risk of confirming a negative stereotype about their race, their gender, ethnicity, something like that. So making sure that we are 100% focused on what is the product that the learner has done, what sort of effort did they put into it, and giving constructive feedback on what was the goal, where are you in relation to that goal, and helping give people a way forward, right? How can you get from where you are now to where you want to be? And I'm going to scaffold and support you to do that. And some of the other things kind of touch on the value and the relevance, right? Taking time to get to know people's interests and opinions and thoughts. What do they like? What do they get fired up about? And then you can connect some of your task and content to the everyday lives of your learner. And I mentioned earlier, that we're never going to have a one-size-fits-all solution to any learning situation or any learning problem, motivational problem, or anything, right? And as we think about our teaching strategies and how we design our training and learning experiences, we have to keep in mind the best way to do something is always going to depend on, multiple things. And I think a safe assumption is that any decisions we make when we think about our course designs or our learning experience designs are driven by a desire to be a better educator and for students to have a better experience. And how you do that will be unique to your own particular course goals, subject matter, teaching content, but the overarching mission is the same. So if we're teaching online, in person, or a hybrid situation, or if we have different learning environments or different groups of students, we need to examine all of our practices and make adjustments based on what makes sense within all of those different parameters. And I see this sort of like, adjusting these levers on like a sound mixing board, right? So we're never going to have just, okay, we set these in stone and we leave them where they are and that's it. As we, work with different students, as we work with different subject matters, as we, contend with, let's say, different levels of prior knowledge, we're going to be kind of moving these things up and down, right? And I've put some labels on here, but your labels might be different, right? But we can think about, you may need to have a greater level of empathy, or you may need to encourage social interactions a little bit more if we're in an online learning experience where maybe students aren't getting as many of those sort of interstitial social interactions that they're used to having. We may be dealing with a population of students who have a low level of self-efficacy, in which case we may need to kind of boost up our lever there of like things that can help boost student confidence and feelings that they can do something. We may be in a situation where the instructor presence, the student's feeling of the instructor presence is lower, so we need to try and do some things to kind of offset that or make up for that, right? And, when we think about this sort of teaching modality, we can think about, what are the things that I would normally do in this situation, which maybe now, let's say I'm in an online environment, what do I need to modify for this new environment? Or are there constraints which will undermine my previous strategies to do something? And what are the ways I can think about to mitigate what's lost or what's changed? Am I seeing things differently in a different learning environment, right? Have the needs of my students changed, or am I seeing them in a new or different way? And which levers do I need to move up, move down? Which things can stay the same? And again, as we talked about at the beginning, this isn't going to be the same for every student, and it's also not going to be the same for every student during every moment along their learning journey. That in some cases, maybe it's at the beginning, you may need to be doing a little bit more or something else that you may be able to fade back a little bit once they develop a little bit more expertise. Thank you so much. And I'm really looking forward to the conference and a discussion with everyone. Always remember, learning is hard, but understanding how it works can help us teach and learn more efficiently. Bye.